Welcome to the Probability Podcast. Discussions on emerging and converging technologies, problems that are being solved, and the probability of positive and negative outcomes that we might expect. Now, please welcome your hosts, Jason, the generator Spracklin, and Patrick, the discriminator Lozon.
Hi everyone. The topic for this week is augmented reality. This technology overlays digital information such as images, sounds, and other data onto the real world. Innovative applications are emerging across various industries, from healthcare to retail. Leading-edge products from companies like Meta and Apple are transforming the way we interact with the world around us. So, the questions for discussion today are: what is augmented reality and how has it evolved from its inception? What are the latest developments in this tech from the major players in the industry? How is AR driving innovation across many diverse industries? And what concerns and risks are associated with this technology as it becomes mainstream? So what do you think, Patrick? Are we ready for our reality to be augmented?
I think we need reality to be augmented.
Yeah.
I think the technology is just moving really fast here too. You look at all the different manufacturers: Sony, TCL, Xreal.
Of course, you have Apple and Meta.
Yeah, Apple's a good one to talk about. I mean, they got the Apple Vision Pro, right? It's rolled out, and they're continuing to expand on it. It's got a 4K capability, and there's this. I guess they've got this capability of with an API, a built-in API in that, so you can actually, program it.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting aspects of this whole idea of augmented reality is we're sort of moving away from this sort of era of having monitors, right? Of having like computer monitors and televisions and all these like physical devices that we're connected to, and we're looking at things through, right? This idea of the 2D, right? We're always looking at sort of a flat screen that's representing 3D, but it's not really 3D. And now with augmented reality, we're moving into this era where everything in front of us is sort of in more of a 3D, a real dimensional plane, in which now we can even manipulate things within that three-dimensional plane in the world around us, as opposed to within a 2D screen. It really sort of changes the game quite a lot.
Yeah, that idea of mixed modes, right? So you got, the virtual reality, which was, you basically put on these big goggles and you were embedded into this virtual world. But now the idea with this augmented technology is it's contextual, right? It's actually projecting out objects and from the virtual world onto and anchoring onto the what you're seeing, right? So it's really incredible stuff. And plus, they're integrating LiDAR. It's not just just your standard camera technology as well. And with that, the idea of being able to manipulate, interface with what happens with those images, how it can respond to, if you make hand gestures and such, or even with your eyes, you can look certain ways and make changes to the image. So the ideas of how to integrate with it are also a big, expanding field as well, right? And this also has some incredible benefits too, from a point of view of all this technology then ties back to, devices that are being used for interfacing that, for people who are impaired and things like that, right? So, create this technology for fun, for games, and then expand it into, commercial, expand it into health and science.
It was interesting. If you look at the early beginnings, though, like augmented reality I guess it became mainstream through applications of gaming and that type of thing, right? But if you
Yeah,
go, all the way back to the beginning of it, was interestingly enough back in 1990 with Boeing,
yeah,
which again was what, like 30 years ago or more. We think of it as newer technology, and certainly it's made a leap recently. But in the 1990s, Boeing coined the term to describe a system that could help workers assemble complicated parts of a new jetliner using a see-through display. So the actual concept has been around for quite a while, and NASA has used it, for navigation purposes and that type of thing, right? The idea of overlaying things into the real world is something that's been around for quite a while.
yeah. I mean, you look at that. Like '92 was Louis Rosenberg, and he kind of coined the term virtual fixtures, and he kind of created this AR system for the Air Force, right? What was interesting about that, I did a little bit of reading on that, is it actually was a hybrid system because that virtual reality system was not fast enough, right, to keep up. So they actually you sat in this kind of exoskeleton, this robotic exoskeleton. It provided you all the motion and movements, as well as you would also have the because they were trying to teach pilots to fly. It was all about the simulation, right? To teach
Yeah,
pilots to fly these jets, and the idea was to make it as real as possible, right? And so you would have split second to make a decision, and you're dead, right? If you don't. And the idea is, that type of that gets into one of the foundational uses of this technology is for training. It's
hmm
safe, right? You can harden your capabilities and be more confident in what you're going to do, whether it be flying a plane or responding to a fire or if you're police working, through a critical situation, all through this VR, right? So,
yeah. It's kind of hard to train in those situations that are high risk and dangerous and
yeah,
type thing, and when it's when people's safety are at risk. So being able to create simulations so that when they do encounter those things in real life, that they kind of have some idea how to react to them is vital, I think.
yeah, for sure. If you go through the, '90s, you got this initial creation, and then 2000, we had a number of different games. AR Quake, is there's Sport Vision, and then in 2010, Microsoft rolled out the HoloLens, and Pokemon Go was released, and that really the technology there at that time was really starting to come into place, right? And then by 2018, 2019, with the HoloLens 2, we had,
So what was the HoloLens exactly? Is that, I guess that was Microsoft version
yeah,
of the holodeck from Star Trek?
yeah,
That was the big showcase, and they would go into this sort of space, and that they would
yeah,
interact in this kind of virtual world in Star Trek. I remember.
yeah. That was an interesting thing too, right? An interesting invention in Star Trek. The idea of um, you're in space, right? What they didn't get into, of course, was traveling between the stars can take a little while, right?
Hmm.
It can be boring, and so they had this big simulator that multiple people could get to, that could go into, and they could, well, they used it for fun, but the idea would be that you can also train and do serious things with it as well. But it would be a vessel, a capability to um, interface and remain sharp at what you're doing. And I think this is where we're going to see things moving eventually too, right? Kind of these shared experiences in
Hmm.
the virtual world, right? Um, and the idea is you would interface with each other in that virtual world. So there's some very interesting, and that virtual world doesn't have to be completely virtual. It could be augmented with, reality and virtual components, right?
Hmm.
So that's where I think things are going to end up, is something like that holodeck. We're not just not quite there yet.
Yeah, because if you're going into like a virtual reality type thing, right? So there's a difference between like the virtual reality and augmented reality, whereas virtual, you're fully immersed in this sort of digital world, as it were, right? But
Yeah,
there's a sense that you're not really there, right? It's sort of it's more like a gamification type thing, whereas augmented reality, you still have a sense of the space sort of around you, so you could almost see, like you mentioned in Star Trek, for example, the idea that they were on these long journeys and that they could go into the holodeck and I guess feel like they were on the beach or something like that. Well,
yeah,
you could almost see an application for, let's just say, people that are immobile, right? Whether they're in an old age home or whether they're just locked at home in terms of a disability or something, where maybe they could put on goggles and it would feel like they're in a forest or on a sandy beach and that type of thing. And you could definitely see some you could think of that in terms of recreation, but for some people, it could provide sort of mental, stimulation and create, people could become happier because of it, because they could escape from the reality, right? So maybe that's part of augmented reality, is sort of escaping from the reality that maybe we're not so happy with, right?
yeah. I think the other side of it, though, is augmented reality is you can actually, what you're doing is you're able to pull in the virtual world onto the physical world, like imprint it, right? So um, the idea would be that you can see, for instance, there can be visualizations of information uh, put around objects, right, and what they are, and you could. A good example would be, let's say you're walking into through a warehouse, and you could look up and see a crate, and the information about what it contained would show up, right? And that type of technology is there now. It's basically the ability to tack on useful information through. Now that goes. You can take it to the next level, of course, right? Where actually you're controlling things, right? But the intent there is that you've got this uh, intermix of reality and virtual converging, right? So when we're looking at what's going on here, I think what would be good to do is maybe we should just go through some of the applications and just kind of get people an understanding of just how far this technology is going. Like you mentioned Boeing, right? So
Mm-hmm.
Boeing has basically the ability for their staff to wear these AR goggles, and um, it's supposed to, according to them, um, you know, allow them to improve their assembly speed by about 30%, or it's a 30% reduction in assembly time, and but a 90% in accuracy. So
Mm-hmm.
not only do they do it faster, but they do it right the first time, right? So you know, layer that on with so you're wearing these glasses, and oh geez, how did they do that? If we can flip over to an instruction video and see it, right? Or you could share up what you're seeing and with another person, right? An expert, let's say, and that expert can guide you through it. Now they did that. I think it was Porsche they were doing that with too, where they had the kind of layman mechanics and technicians, and they would kind of call into home office, and they would wear these AR goggles, and they would look at the technology of the car and sort of what and help diagnose what was going on with the help of a kind of like a master mechanic, so to speak. Um, and if you think about that, that's pretty impressive, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a sharing of minds, right? And this visualization component, right, of being able to see and visualize, the details, the complexities behind something. So you think about a plane, I don't know how many miles of wires and electrical components and sensors and all that are throughout the plane, right? And all these different connectors. And yeah, you can imagine, I mean, the idea of, building these planes, and you have to be very precise, right? Um, the intent, of course, is you're going off, 2D drawings and, CAD drawings and such, and you're building these 3D, representations, and that, the real understanding of that can be missed. So now with this technology, you're merging, your 2D into 3D virtual, and you're imprinting that upon the reality, right? So you can see, this cable or these circuits here, lay these out here, assemble these this way, right? And with that, of course, you're ensuring that you're doing per spec, right? What needs to be done, and with that, of course, you can also censor if things are done in the right position. You can respond and adjust things so that they are where they need to be.
So there must be a complexity there when
Yeah,
when you're assembling, like a Boeing aircraft where you can't really automate it, reliably, right, with robotics and that type of thing. Although maybe eventually we'll get there, but when you're looking at high end, aircraft or cars, Formula One cars or what have you, you probably need that human there doing that work, so that because you really can't have a margin of error, whereas you can automate a car factory because by and large cars are fairly repeatable and fairly maybe not as complex, but I'm sure that's why Boeing still has a human element involved in assembling them, but certainly with the augmentation piece they can ensure, like you said, that it's much more accurate.
yeah, they're turning people into robots in a way.
Yeah.
If you think about it, there's another one too. It's a company called ThyssenKrupp, and of course they build, they also build for defense. So they build submarines. You can imagine, I mean, a submarine, right? All these different control systems, and never mind just the hull, the outer hull, and all the different components and the welds. And I mean, you're going down. Was it every 10 meters, your pressure increases by 1 atmosphere. You go down, 1,000, 10,000 meters. What kind of pressures you're dealing with?
Oh yeah.
You just can't afford a mistake, right? And so you have to be very precise. So this also is being used to help with quality, right, and managing quality. So you think about that, the potential there for saving money and not putting out a defective product is incredible, right? So I'm sure there's a lot of companies now that would benefit that aren't using AR, right? That should really consider this, and how they can do this. And ThyssenKrupp, they've got an interesting one where they do maintenance on their elevators, right? So the intent there is, that's with elevators. These are machines that are not only, you have to be precise about them, but you also have to do proactive maintenance with them, right? Because you don't want them down. You don't wait for them to break and then come fix them, right? You do proactive maintenance, right? And at the same time, since it's a safety situation, you do proactive maintenance. So the idea is, what they've done is they have actual, calculated life hours on components on the elevator. And what they've done is they've imprinted that with their maintenance system, and they've tied that back to the the AR system for the technician. So the AR system is actually pointing out or isolating the different components that need to be replaced, right, on the equipment. right?
Well, talking about like converging technologies again, I guess this is
Yeah,
where AI is going to start to come in. So when you start to intersect, AI with AR, now you're getting into some really interesting areas, right? Where you could proactively have AI pointing out things through augmented reality for technicians and other types of people involved in maintaining things like elevators, like you said.
yeah, yeah. I mean, whether it be just training or whether it be actual real life, application for maybe simulations and things like that. Yeah, I mean, sky's the limit, right? And then think about healthcare, right? Training, surgical assistants, but also training as well. And then think about the next level of where we're going with medical diagnosis. We have nanotechnology. You swallow these tiny little devices, and they can image. And imagine being able to use an AR set, to navigate and actually see, through the human body, all the body tissues and organs and what have you. And with this technology, it's presenting information where we can't see it normally, right? These are little tiny little
Mm.
robots. I mean, it's seeing things at a very, very microscopic layer level, and this whole presentation layer is is handled through the AR system, and showing and representing to the person side of it, these different areas of the body, right? So I mean just think about it. It's amazing, right? Where
Yeah,
we're
then
going
you
with
could
this.
segue that into sort of, training, like we keep coming back to the training side of it, but, medical education, that type of thing, right? So,
Yeah,
because I think that, again, that combination of AR and AI could show you things that you wouldn't normally understand, perhaps, right? So it can be used as, maybe not even just for, like you said, training is one thing where you're teaching somebody how to do something that's sort of been established, but learning and education is like a whole other area where something like AR could be used to really help people truly understand what they're looking at a
yeah,
lot faster than they normally would potentially, right?
yeah. I mean, think about these drones and that, right? Um, they're flying remotely. I mean, they're running cameras and that. But the thing is, if you take a drone and you outfit it with many many sensors, and how do you tie all that information back to the operator, right? You would do that with AR, right? You wouldn't do that with just a flat,
Mm.
you know, screen and a bunch of display readouts. You're actually, looking at a whole new, 3D interface, right? And this is where it gets really interesting, right? Like you said, right? You go in and you're you don't need a monitor for your computer anymore. Everything's kind of coming up in front of you, and in a virtual fashion, you can wave it off, and come up with another screen, and you think, well, how's this? How did we ever do with these fixed LCD screens? I mean, it's that's archaic.
Well, when you think about it, yeah, because it's
Yeah,
interesting because there is something different about interacting with anything in sort of a true 3D realm as opposed to looking at a screen, which is always just a representation of something that's 3D, right? It's
yeah,
sort of like, maybe not the right analogy, but the difference between watching like a music concert, on a television or on a big screen, as opposed to actually going to that event and the whole immersive nature of it is it's like night and day. You literally cannot replicate it on a screen. I mean, I have lots of concert DVDs and Blu-rays and things that I've collected over the years, and I do enjoy watching them, but it pales in comparison to the real life scenario of not just looking at the artist performing in 3D, but the whole venue and the people and the whole experience of it. It just doesn't compare at all. So I think
yeah,
just you can carry that over to any of these situations where you can get a much deeper sense of what's in front of you if you're able to see it in a true 3D fashion. In other words, in terms of augmented reality, you can be looking at something and maybe even like walk around it, right? And
Yeah.
look at it from different angles in sort of real time, as opposed to like sort of manipulating something on the screen, which is always going to feel different, right?
Yeah. And not only do you have to limit, you don't even need to limit the vision, right? This is where it's really interesting. I mean, I know that's really the big move right now. That's really what we're talking about. But I mean, augmented reality, you could be using sound, you could use, smell, you could use all these different other sensitive, systems, sensory systems, to, um, convey information. You know, um, I don't know. It's getting hot, so you can smell something burning, right? Just I don't know. I just come to mind. But the idea is that you can also sound a higher frequency, lower frequency. You can imagine what this operator would do. If he's flying a drone, but also has temperature sensors and pressure sensors and um, you know
Well, they
uh,
tried that in the theaters at one point where they were having these 3D movies, and
yeah
then they tried to up the ante where they were using things like, if I remember correctly, if there was a scene where somebody was going through like a jungle, they were actually like spraying mist in the movie theater, or I think they might have even had smells, or
yeah
and even
yeah
some of the theaters had these chairs that would move in accordance with the action scenes, and they were really trying to immerse people into what was still just really a 2D experience. I mean, with the 3D glasses, you got a much better sense of depth, but you were
as,
still,
as the
you know,
sword comes to you, or the knife, yeah, or
oh, I
the
still
axe.
remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's for sure. Well,
I still
it's
remember my first 3D movie. I don't even remember what it was called, but I still vividly remember the sensation of somewhere in the movie, at some point, this guy turned around and he put out, like you said, like it was like a sword or something at the screen, and it
yeah,
was like inches from my face. And I
yeah,
mean, this is I mean, we're talking like the 1980s, right? Like
yeah,
very
yeah,
rudimentary 3D technology, but
yeah,
I remember how like arresting it was in the moment. I was so used to seeing these things in 2D, and all of a sudden this thing's out. I'm 50 feet from the movie screen, and it's right in my face, right?
yeah, yeah. And that's what's really great is that this immersion into the feedback, right? Which could be very on point and very powerful to whoever's wearing that, right? So the other thing too, if you look at the whole idea of keep going down the visualization road from e-commerce side, is do people actually have a great imagination? Well, I don't know. Like, could they virtually put on a dress or virtually see what their remodeled kitchen would look like? Yeah, there's lots of different um, you know tools out there that are doing that even on the flat 2D space.
Hmm.
And then the idea is that you go into 3D, and then you can get the whole sensory, and I'll say imagine going into I don't know, a home, and right now we've got the walkthroughs, which are 2D camera, but imagine putting on a 3D AR unit, and then having an actual walkthrough of the house. Then, right? It'd be
Yeah. Well, I
completely
mean,
different, right?
if you look at, even like you talked about, like in commerce, like buying furniture and other things for your house, you kind of typically you buy it with a certain, idea in mind. Oh, I think this would look good in my space, and then yet you don't really know until you get it. When you get it and it doesn't work, then you're kind of stuck with having to return it and that type of thing. But even beyond that, trying to come up with designs. I mean, I went through a renovation of my own home, and thankfully, my wife's sister is an interior designer, and she uses 3D software, and we had a pretty good idea of, generally speaking, what things were going to look like. But it was still a little bit challenging when it came down to like picking out, couches and furniture and other things, and what that would actually feel like in the space. So you could see this idea of being able to, represent that in your space, and a lot of that has existed for a little while, really, in the sense of, that you can upload a picture of your living room, and then it'll show you the couch in that space and some sort of 3D representation. But now with augmented reality, you could sort of superimpose it in the space, and you could walk around and really get the feel for that, piece of furniture in your space. If you look at the new technology that Meta is working on, and maybe others as well, but they have these glasses with these little mini projectors built into them where they're actually projecting out sort of holograms into the real world. Whereas sort of AR for a while, even in terms of the goggles, was sort of superimposing things, even still almost in a 2D plane, because it was superimposing them like within the glasses. And now augmented reality is moving into this area where we're projecting 3D objects into the space in a much more realistic manner. So you could actually say, "Oh, I'm interested in this couch," and you could walk around with the glasses on, and it would be pretty realistic of that, couch sitting in your living room. I don't know how we feel about spending billions of dollars inventing tech that helps you buy a couch, but we're just talking about an idea of how it could be used, right? You could extrapolate that to doing something different in your backyard or what have you, right? It definitely makes things easier for the consumer, but also easier on the on the commercial side of things too.
Yeah, I mean, you could, we see that in the movies too. People kind of visualize, you see this 3D projection of a complicated device. I think it was Marvel's or whatever, basically the Iron Man or something scene where he's tearing apart his suit and trying to find what was going on with it. And he was, re-engineering the suit kind of virtually. And that's the type of technology that everybody's kind of shooting for, right? That's what they're going for. And of
So
course,
now we can afford it, and not just the billionaire Tony Stark, right? Now
that's right.
we'll all have his technology.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, the intent, of course, would be that with that you're reducing cost and you're able to do things faster and do things more precisely, and so you're raising quality and that kind of thing, right? Uh, so yeah, the technology I think has to be, you have to look at it individually, specifically by application, and figure out where things make sense to use it, because it's not cheap, right? But it's not really, really expensive now either, right? Um, so building systems around this technology, that's where money gets invested. Like I talked about, the elevator maintenance, and that's a whole integrated environment there. That's software systems tied into the augmented reality systems, tied into the service technician work and their work orders and what they do when they go on site, and tying back that and anchoring that what they're seeing to specific components. I mean, that's all very, fairly advanced application of this technology. Um, Not just a game, right? But it's incredibly powerful. And with that, you can do a lot of amazing, from a technical perspective, you do a lot of amazing work in the field. And maybe oil and gas and things like that, where you're out, in the middle of nowhere, and you've got to make assessments on a large piece of pipe or something, and you can get the flow rates, and you can get the temperatures and what have you, turbulence, whatever kind of weird stuff you can pull down from all the primary systems, and make decisions on whether or not you're going to shut that component down and do the maintenance, or you know what I mean. Like it's just it's incredibly powerful,
Oh,
if
for sure,
where
yeah.
it's applied, right?
Well,
Yeah,
the tech's getting better in terms of it's becoming lighter, more wearable, right? It used to be
yeah,
that a lot of these, AR devices were sort of very big and clunky, and even Apple's new device is very high tech. It's still fairly big. It still looks like some sort
yeah,
of pair of futuristic goggles on your face. Now, apparently, they've got it to the point where it's very light and very comfortable and that type of thing. But as opposed to like what Meta's working on, which they have one product, which is they partner with Ray-Ban, who's a maker of regular sunglasses
Yeah.
and prescription glasses. So they're trying to go for something, and this is what Google was doing with this Google Glass concept a while ago, was trying to make something, because a lot of us wear either because we have to for prescription, or people wear sunglasses and we're used to that. As soon as you put sort of a big set of goggles on your head, you're in a whole different realm, right? And I've done a little bit of that. And if you fly a drone, you put this on, it feels very obtrusive on your head. And certainly if you're
Yeah.
working in the field, now something that's sort of almost impeding you. But now that we've reduced the form factor on these, you could see the more mainstream adoption, and also the ability to use them in some of those situations like you described. But I was also reading about companies like Nissan looking at assistive driving and that type of thing, and navigation using augmented reality. Whether that's wearing a pair of glasses in your car, or the car itself putting like a heads up kind of display in front of you on the windshield. There's some interesting sort of applications there, as it were, because I've been in a lot of situations where I've been trying to navigate somewhere, and I've looked at things on Google Maps and maybe even looked at them on Street View. But when you get into the middle of a busy city like Toronto, and you're trying to find like a parking garage, or you're trying to navigate to a specific area, you're really relying on your wits and your memory of what you looked at, as opposed to having this sort of idea of real time navigation. And that's in a city that I know fairly well. But you can imagine if you're traveling and going to cities that you don't know well, and you're trying to get that perfect navigation somewhere, you could see where these technologies could really help in terms of not just navigating you, but potentially highlighting dangers of things that maybe you're not noticing right away. It might, highlight, a fire truck coming through an intersection that, because you're playing loud music in your car, you just didn't hear, or whatever it is, right? So you could see where these technologies can start to converge and sort of help people through real life situations, right?
Specifically, uh, you think about all these safety systems that are going in cars now, using LiDAR and even the camera systems, where they're actually, getting information and possibly tying into the internet too, but getting information about what's ahead of you, right? And what those dangers are, right? And that can be presented in different methods, right?
Yeah,
To
because a
the
lot of that's
driver.
out of the line of sight right now. I mean, if you look at,
Yeah.
I took an Uber a little while ago, and it was a Tesla, and just the screen on this thing is massive, right? But in a lot of cars, it's not, and it's sort of like, I mean, sometimes I've been driving, I haven't noticed that I have my signal light on, so we're not always,
Yeah.
we're looking at the road in front of us, and we're not always constantly paying attention to what's on the screen. So we can have all these smart navigation things and everything on the dash, but by and large, you're looking at the road when you're driving. So if we can have this sort of augmented reality overlaying important information within our line of sight, I think it actually makes driving safer.
Well, see, that's where things get interesting, because that's when reality is getting closer to the holodeck, right? So it's not about wearing a set of glasses or anything. It's this holographic um, image coming up, and you can see it, and it's a 3D representation of whatever, um, and that is just there, right? It's somehow being projected in thin air, right? And whatever technology that is, I mean, that's where we're going, right? And with that, of course, you're looking at a whole new type of user interface with that. It it just opens up the doors for some
Oh, for
amazing,
sure. We
yeah,
combine that with autonomous cars, right?
yeah,
And now the car's driving itself. You have an AR display in front of you, and you can watch a movie while you drive,
yeah.
right? And
Well, okay. Yeah, yeah. One of the things I was talking about was I read about it was interesting was the tourism. When you go through, let's say you go through a museum, right? Imagine having your own, tour guide.
hmm.
Kind of in your ear, providing all this auxiliary data about what you're looking at, right? Like, it's incredible, like what you'd get from that experience versus, you just go in and you just look around, right? It's this is where the technologies, from a
Well,
point of
it's
view
more
of
immersive, right?
yeah,
It's
it could
definitely more immersive. I went to see the Formula One exhibit in Toronto there a few months ago, and they did have this sort of idea of an immersive experience, but really what they gave you was a set of headphones that were tied into a thing, and then when you came up to a display, you would point this sort of sensor thing at it and click a button, and it would play a voiceover in your ears, right? So it wasn't, it really wasn't really high technology, but it didn't feel as immersive as maybe it could have. So I could have imagined, like, for example, in certain areas of the exhibit, they had full on Formula One cars. They had a couple of really classic ones from back in like the 70s, say. They had a brand new or fairly new Formula One car in the one area that was just massive. I mean, this thing was beyond impressive just to stand in front of. It would have been cool to have that augmented reality overlay sort of explaining the car to me,
Yeah.
and how
Here's the
things
engine,
worked.
and
And
here's
yeah,
a schematic of the engine and how it works and how much horsepower, and blah blah blah, all kind of imprinted on the actual car itself, right? It'd be really cool, yeah, for sure.
they can explain how the different pieces work and the way they. I mean, this thing is engineered like a fighter jet in terms
Yeah,
of downforce on the front
yeah,
and all these things, right? That and they didn't even have a voiceover for it. It was pretty impressive walking around this thing, but I could see where an augmented reality would have really made that whole Formula One exhibit come to life for sure.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, we're just skimming the surface on this technology when you really think about it. I mean, where is it going? Well, like I said, I think it's where it's going is the no need, eventually the no need to have glasses. But in the meantime, we are going to have glasses, or headsets or what have you. So whether it be that you're getting trained on how to pilot a naval ship or fly a plane, or put together a very complicated schematic of wiring, or you're just playing a game. I mean, there's so many different things that you can use this for right now.
Look at like the applications for work, right? If they, in the demo they made for this, or they in the demo they showed for Meta, they had him bringing up computer screens, right? He was working on Windows and he was superimposing them and he was creating multiple displays all in front of him, wearing these glasses that really just looked like fairly normal glasses. And I guess where I'm going with that is that you're no longer stuck to the workstation, right? You could be anywhere.
Yeah,
For example, in this age of remote work, you could be sitting on a beach in Jamaica and having your goggles on and have a virtual workstation in front of you and a
yeah,
virtual keyboard or what have you, and really work wherever you are. So again, back to this idea that we're sort of moving beyond the idea of having physical monitors and devices and things that interact with computers. I mean, that's really where it's headed, and it gives you more freedom and more flexibility to do more things. Um, not be tied to your home office or not be tied to your actual office, or even for people that don't have mobility and things, that they could sit in bed and surf the internet or watch a movie or what have you in ways that they couldn't before. They showed somebody projecting a huge screen onto the ceiling and just lying in bed and watching it, that type of
yeah,
thing, right? So
yeah,
there's some pretty interesting applications. I mean, some of it's more on sort of the fun side, some's more on the practical side, but it's definitely the direction that things are heading for in terms of that interface between us and our, and the internet and other types of worlds that we interact with right now, right? But
yeah.
with that,
We even talked about that in season one when we were talking about imagine the translator, right? That tied
oh
back into
yeah,
those
yeah.
glasses, and the idea of being able to not only have the glasses that had little tiny speakers in them, but also would do that visualization for translations and things like that as well. So in the end, I think that the technology is open and promising. It's just how can it be implemented in a financially acceptable way where people would actually want to buy that technology, or companies will want to use that technology, right? And I think that's kind of where we're at right today, because I think it's at a point where it's really quite good. It's just a matter of all the supporting systems around it that need help.
No, absolutely. So I think, the other side of things as well with any technology is there's always some sort of concern or risk or things to be considered, right? We always tend to go into, the positive side of things and the exciting part, but we inevitably always come back to, the concerns and risks and that type of thing, right? So
Yeah.
and I don't think this is any different really, because now we're creating new ways to interact, right? Whether you're, driving or whether you're just sitting at home working or whatever, you still now have this sort of, I mean, it's right in the name of it, right? The idea of augmented reality. And so how does that start to sort of interfere with the reality in front of you, and what sort of hazards are we going to encounter there, right?
Yeah. What happens if they get hacked?
Yeah.
Your augmented glasses. What happens there? I would, I don't know. I mean, sure, there's worries about safety, and there's worries about privacy, and it's none of that's going to go away. I mean, the other thing too would be um, cognitive fatigue for us, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, being on all the time, right? It's like that, where it just becomes too much, and you just want to just take all this technology and stick it in the closet and go and sit out in the backyard. You know what I mean? listen to listen to the little critters, and feel the wind on your skin, and the sun on your face.
Yeah, we're now introducing some sort of virtual things into the real space. And that can, from, like you said, from a cognitive point of view, could cause things like distraction, reduce situational awareness, things like that. We're already distracted enough with our phones and whatnot. But it definitely, can put your brain into a different, frame, for example, right? Like I was recently, kind of trying to learn how to use a drone and
Yeah, yeah.
get some kind of footage using these goggles. I could see what the drone could see, and I was in a situation where I was filming in an indoor space, and you really get immersed to the point where you feel like you're sort of in the drone, as it were, right? And one of the things I noticed was that when I had the drone up really high and then I started to do like a dive down because the kind of shot that I wanted, I felt my whole body just start to tip forward, where I almost fell over,
Oh
right?
my.
And this was
Okay.
sort of my brain getting tricked into thinking that it was in the drone in a sense, right? And then all of a sudden gravity and inertia kind of took over. But it was a really strange feeling, because, I knew what I was doing, but somewhere in that process, my brain took over and almost toppled me over.
Yeah. Well, I get it. The idea of your body likes to have your eyes at a certain level, and um, if you're not at that ideal position, to make adjustments with the rest of your body, and you can have, like, next thing you know, you have a hip problem or a knee problem or a back problem, and it's all based on your brain wants to see, your vision has to be centered and level, and this is all interesting stuff you're talking about, because what will this do to us over the
It's
long
all
term?
sensory input, right? Your
Yeah.
eyes are taking everything in. And, from the moment you wake up, right, you're using it to navigate spaces, and it's taking in light and color and everything else, right? It is your reality. And now we're augmenting that reality, and we're introducing things that aren't really there. And so, and what sort of impact is that ultimately going to have? In some cases, positive, in some cases, maybe not, right? It's sort of an interesting conundrum, I guess.
But where's it going? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a good question, really. I mean, we talked about its application across a lot of different industries, right? So, from a very practical, controlled sense, I mean, it's great in a way, right? We're really going to see some advancements and some improvements in the way that we're doing things. I think what we're starting to see is this sort of mainstream availability of it, right? Where we're going to now move from people kind of staring at their phones to where they're going to have these glasses on and where they're going to access everything virtually and digitally. And you're not really going to know what everybody's seeing. I mean, typically, if you look at somebody who's holding a phone, you can say, okay, well, that person's on their phone, they're immersed. But when you get into the world of glasses, you really don't know what they're doing, right? I mean, we're already seeing students cheating on exams using AI, and now you're going to have the whole world available to you through glasses. And, that might seem a little bit far-fetched, but, the idea that we were all going to walk around with a supercomputer in our pocket, 20 years ago was crazy and far-fetched. And now, I mean, you barely go anywhere without your phone, right? It's your whole connection to the world. And I do think when they get this form factor right, and it's easy to kind of throw on a pair of glasses and you have the whole world in front of you that you want, right? Whether it's surfing the internet or watching a movie, and they do it really well, and there's no sort of, eye fatigue and things associated with it. I do think that it's going to become mainstream. And like every technology, people kind of scoff at it at first and think, oh, it's, the latest, tech invention for geeks and this type of thing. But I do see it eventually, and maybe fairly quickly, becoming mainstream, right? When you see companies like Meta partnering with Ray-Ban, you're going to see other companies like Apple and whatnot move in that direction as well, right?
Yeah.
And it's only a matter of time before it becomes mainstream, and that's where things start to get really interesting in many ways. And I guess the only question I have is: reality not good enough? we're always trying to augment our reality, right?
Thank you for listening to the Probability Podcast. Please join us next time for more musings from the generator and the discriminator.